So good evening and welcome to the Big Data Talk series, the Talk Big Data series at the University of Essex. My name is Mcneil. I'm Executive Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I'm going to be introducing things here. Just a few words, housekeeping matters before we get started with the real business. Firstly, just to say that we're being filmed. This event is all being filmed. And if you don't want to be filmed, please sit on the far side of the auditorium, that's this side, where you should be out of sight, out of line of sight. Also, there are no planned fire alarm tests, so if you do hear an alarm, it's real. Please leave the building. If you do hear an alarm, if we have to vacate, there is an exit behind you, probably the exit we came through, and there's another one to my left over here. The toilets, if you need them, are off the entrance foyer and they're signposted. If you need any assistance, there are lots of Talk Big Data team members wearing badges dotted around and they'll help you. Finally, can I ask you to just check that your phones are on silent? I'm not asking you to switch them off because if you're a keen tweeter, you might wish to tweet. The hashtag is Talk Big Data. Please feel free to tweet during the event. Now, I hope you will also have picked up a clicker, a polling clicker on your way in. Have you all got a clicker? Show me the clickers. Yes, good. Okay, excellent. We're going to have a couple of questions, and you'll get to use your clicker in a minute. So just to test your clicker, you use the answer buttons, and your chosen answer will initiate a green light on the clicker. And this means that your vote has been registered. So you need to see the green light for your vote. So let's just get warmed up and see where we are at the start before you've heard the panel of speakers. Can you tell me, click the green light, click the yes button. I haven't seen one of these clickers. What do they look like? Is it yes? No? Is it? Okay, is it clear what you do?
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. There's multiple choice.
I haven't even seen these. Okay, so it's a number. Okay. A, they're A, B. Okay, all right. Let me give you that back. Okay, so click the following, the one that applies to you. A, if you're a student. B, if you're a member of the university staff. C, if you work in the private sector. D, if you work in the public sector. And E, if you're none of the above. Shall I just go through those again? A, student. B, university staff. C, work in the private sector. D, work in the public sector. E, other. None of the above. They're not working. Okay, I wasn't told that. But do people have to switch them on? Okay, we'll start that again. Okay, once again. A, student. B, university staff. C, work in the private sector. D, work in the public sector. E, other. Don't get into debating the terms of things, Matthew. Is that okay? Have we registered that? Yes, okay, all right. Next question. Please tell us how much you feel you currently know and understand about big data. A, a lot. B, a little. C, nothing at all. A, a lot. B, a little. C, nothing at all. Okay. Finally, are you aware that research using big data collected by different organisations can change lives? A, yes, I am aware. B, I have some awareness. Or C, no, I am not aware. A, yes. B, I have some awareness. C, no, I'm not aware. Okay, I've got the thumbs up. Thank you for that. We'll come back to these questions at the end. You can put your clickers down, but be ready to pick them up again afterwards. So on to tonight's theme. I should also say that in terms of having started a bit late, we will overrun by about the amount of time that we've started late. I understand some of you may have pressing appointments to get to, so do feel free to leave. We're not holding you in the room, but we hope you can stay till the end, and we're sorry about starting late. So tonight's theme is changing lives through research. We're running this event as part of the Economic and Social Research Council's Festival of Social Science. The ESRC funds research into fundamental social and economic questions that face us today. And the festival is a week-long celebration of social science research. There's a feedback sheet which the ESRC asks us to complete, and we'd be very grateful if you'd fill out the form and drop it in the box at the end of the event. But, okay, to the business of the evening. You might well be wondering, what is big data? As always with academic research, there's a lot of contesting definitions about. That's our stock in trade as academics, as you saw from Matthew's questioning just then. But for tonight's purposes, we're defining big data as data that consists of extremely large or complex data sets that can be analysed by computers to reveal patterns, trends and associations, particularly in human behaviour and interactions. Social science studies human society, and the research carried out by social scientists helps us to understand and interpret how society works. As examples, from the causes and consequences of unemployment and social inequality, to how people make decisions and choices about key elements of their lives, relationships and household formation, choosing schools and universities and so on, and how we can understand the policies and practices that promote economic growth. The results of social science research using big data provides evidence from large swathes of the population and can contribute to improved decision-making for public and private sector organisations, large and small. A well-known example of social science big data that many of you will be familiar with is the census, which provides a detailed account of how people are living in the UK on a given date. The census covers many aspects of our lives: family and household relationships and formation, health and social care, migration and demography, ethnicity, national identity, language and religion, labour market, housing and qualifications, and information about travel to work areas and other elements of geography and how that matters. Today's discussion is the third of 3 events in the Talk Big Data series. It's hosted by 3 big data projects, which you see behind me, based at the university, all of which are funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. The projects are the Administrative Data Research Network, the Business and Local Government Data Research Centre, and the Human Rights Big Data and Technology Project. In addition to these projects, we have a wealth of further research going on here at Essex in big data. We have the Institute for Analytics and Data Science, and we're very pleased to hear just recently that its director, Professor Maria Fazli, has been invited to join UNESCO's prestigious universities network in relation to the Institute's work in analytics and data science. We also have the world-leading UK Data Archive and UK Data Service, and a number of other multidisciplinary research projects spread across the university. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our chair, Katherine Mcneil. Katherine is the new Director of Data Access at the UK Data Service, which is located here at the university. And she's recently joined us from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where she worked to support MIT researchers with finding and managing data for their research. Katherine's now responsible for strategic leadership and the development of data access here at the UK Data Service, and for looking at how big data research and data analytic tools can be improved and developed. So for further information about Katherine, I think there's some information in your packs or programmes that were on your chairs. Katherine, I'm going to give the floor to you now.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Sasha. So Sasha mentioned the big data research projects at Essex, which are still in their infancy, but since the 1960s, the University of Essex has a long tradition for pioneering research that drives social change and for thinking about the role of data in that research. And the UK Data Archive, where I work, will be celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. So they're both new initiatives as well as building on a long history. And the three big data projects which we mentioned combine these more traditional research methodologies with the latest digital skills and technology, and have become an exciting addition to the social and economic research expertise at Essex. And we have panelists from a number of, not from these particular projects, from outside areas that can help us think with these projects, what is the role of data and research, and what is the role of research in helping to improve people's lives and society. So I'm going to get started to introduce our panelists. And I'd like to briefly introduce each of them, but more detailed information is in your packet. So to my left, I have Sharon Witherspoon, who's the head of policy at the Academy of Social Sciences and the Campaign for Social Science. Then we have two people joining us from the Essex County Council, and they might not be in the full program that you have, but they graciously stepped in modestly at the last minute to fill in for somebody from UCAS who could not make it. So we have Patrick Guthrie, who's the head of public service reform at the Essex County Council, and then to his left, to my left, to your right, Stephen Simpkin, who's the organizational intelligence analyst with a focus on health and social care data. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Mounia Lalmas, the director of research for Yahoo London. And the scope of this session is to focus on demonstrating about how research using data, big and complex data, will either improve business services or change lives in all these sectors that we're talking about. And I have some areas I'd like to explore with the panel and questions to ask, and we'll do that for about 45 minutes, and then we'll give you all time to ask your questions, talk about your issues that you would like to have the panel address. And the issues may touch on topics surrounding, for example, data access and specific topics around privacy and consent. And if you're specifically interested in ethics and privacy issues, that the next series talk that we have happening a week from today is going to focus on that, so you'll be interested in that as well. So the first question I have for the panelists is, how can research using big data provide evidence to help decision makers? So why don't we just start down the line and give Sharon the first opportunity to answer.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to the University of Essex for having me here. It's really a leader in use of data for strong social science research, but also with really high standards for data security, ethics, and so on. It's important for us to say, what do we mean by administrative data? I also sit as deputy chair of the Administrative Data Research Network Board. You can tell a advertising person didn't have anything to do with the choice of that title. It is to oversee the work that tries to obtain data from government departments that's routinely collected for their own administrative business. So it could be benefit records, it can be tax records, it could be all kinds of records that are school results, exam results. It can be all kinds of data that are collected by government departments with people's names on them, or with identifiers that can be linked to their name that say, here's what these people did. And they use that both to run public services, and they use it to compile the annual statistics and national statistics. What the Administrative Research Data Network does is to try to get access to those data, to depersonalize them. The technical term is de-identify, but I think there's a sense that it's important to convey they take away the personal identifiers and then use them on their own. But through the network, what we're trying to do is link them with data from other government departments, or with surveys like the cohort studies or the longitudinal study run here at Essex. So very briefly, what that means is you could look at health inequality. What information do we have about people who are on benefits, who live in different kinds of housing, and how that is correlated with their health? And if we get the ordering right and can link it with a survey, we could say, what causes ill health? Is it because you've got ill health that you end up on benefits, which is true for some people, or what's going on with people who are poor and that leads them into ill health? You can look at school data. So you can say, well, we can see what the results are for children who are in care, who are taken from their families, versus other poor children. So you can get a sense, what effect might being in care have? We can look at various issues to do with school and data or exam data, so we can say, and this is a piece of research that's actually been done, once we know people in various surveys and we know what discipline they studied as undergraduates, we can also see what premium they get if they've had A-level maths as well, because you don't have that information all in one place, and you have to link and match in a depersonalized way to be able to say, well, if you're a sociologist like me, does it help if you have some sort of number skills? Now, all of those examples are real examples, but I think what's important is they aren't just there to help make government decision-making better. The hope is in some cases they will. They're sometimes there to make government independent research carried out in a robust way can help make government more accountable, to be clear that the outcomes it claims are the ones that are happening, or that these policy areas may have links that government should be accountable for. But they can also sometimes be useful to ordinary citizens. So you've got these school results, and actually that allows people to talk about the fact that if you just take an AS in maths or statistics, even as a social scientist, that will not only open up a whole new exciting area of work to do, and I would say that, but it can also be really helpful in the long-term labor market. So it's not just decision-making by people doing things to citizens. It is to create a culture of accountability and information.
Great, thank you. That's a great perspective. And now onto the perspective of the County Council. And we have two people from there who represent how they work together as a team on research and decision-making.
Thank you. Good evening, and I share the thanks that Sharon mentioned to the university and to you all for attending. So just to say, yes, so big data is very valuable. So increasingly the model of public services is changing. So traditionally, and this is a bit of a caricature, but traditionally it's been reactive, siloed, top-down and uniform. So what I mean is, so if if you had a drug and alcohol problem, you would then get treatment at the point at which, that presented itself. And that would be sort of reactive to a particular problem, or children's social care or adult social care would kick in at the point at which you present with a problem that meets the relevant thresholds, and it would be provided within an organisation in a sort of siloed way, top-down, relatively uniform. Now that model is no longer valid for a variety of reasons. Obviously, cost is a big thing. That treating problems after they've materialised is very expensive. It's not the sort of way that people live their lives anymore. People expect a sort of joined-up approach across public services. They expect more personalised approaches to their particular circumstances. So for a variety of reasons, that model of providing public services is no longer sustainable or desirable, doesn't lead to the best outcomes, isn't cost-effective. So public services are moving to a model now that is much more proactive, joined-up, community-based and person-centred. That's a lot of jargon, but basically it's, how you consume perhaps in your private lives, how you would expect your commercial services to be provided. Increasingly, public services are sort of moving more in that direction. And you get better outcomes if you can support people in addressing problems early in a joined-up way across the system, rather than waiting until problems escalate, basically. So that is the context in which public services are changing. And in that context, big data is obviously really important. You can see that immediately, can't you? That if you can use big data to gain insights into trends and patterns, if you can share that across partners and take a joined-up view across a system, you can see how essential that is to delivering this new model of public services. So it's very important. But it is, and this will be one point, it is a part of a mix of insight. So big data is important, but other sources of insight are really important also, including going and actually talking to people in communities, users of services, and getting a real understanding of their lived experience. So, you don't just sit there and just analyse data and then say, oh, well, the answer is X. It's just part of a mix. So it's important that we bear that in mind. And we're doing a lot of great work with the university. We've got this Catalyst programme, multi-million-pound programme that we're running with the support of the university to use big data to improve people's lives. So we're doing a pilot in Basildon where we're looking at school readiness for 5-year-olds. So how can we use big data to gain insight that will help us work with the communities to improve the early years for children and get good school readiness? Because we know that if children have a better start in life, then that will flow through to the rest of their lives and is a sort of a life-changing thing, really. So we think big data's got a lot of potential there, and we're using it also in other areas as well as part of this Catalyst program.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, thank you. Just to add really quickly to what Patrick's kind of said there, you mentioned that Catalyst project, and for me, the word Catalyst can be applied to big data in general, really. Two things very high on the agenda in the public sector are collaboration and partnership working, and also predictive analytics. And this kind of Catalyst project brings together both of those, really. Without that partnership working, from ourselves and kind of other kind of county partners and the help of university, the programme will fail. And without the kind of forward-thinking and proactive kind of predictive analytics aspects and more intelligent kind of analysis, we need big data. So I think I'll kind of reiterate the point that it's really, really important, but it is just kind of one of the tools in a whole suite of kind of analytical skills we need to kind of utilise. I'm always looking to kind of apply kind of ethnographic approaches to kind of analysis, but fundamentally we need the best information and intelligence available to us, and in some shape that will come in the form of big data. Thank you.
Once again, I want to add to thanking the University of Essex for the invitation. It's always lovely. It's a lovely campus. I've been here before, and it was nice to be back. So I'm going to bring a different perspective, coming more from the industry. So a company like Yahoo will have what is called a lot of properties. For example, news, mail, finance site, and all those kind of things. And this is something that more and more of the people use on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, and so on. It's part of their daily life, their daily online life. So, although maybe to some extent the focus is not to improve people's life in terms of the health, it's trying to improve the experience of the user so they can just do their mail quicker, do the kind of things they want to do when reading the news, and so on. Is about not just building the right experience, but to make it relevant at the right time, to try to really help with this kind of deluge of so much things around the world, and so on. So in the context of news, what are the information what are the kind of news that somebody would be interested in? Of course, there's the big news that everybody is interested, but there's more local news. There's more things that are of interest to you, and so on. So this is where the usage of big data, you have millions of users. We will discuss later on about personalization, depersonalization, and all this. It will come later. But it's really to try to cater for an experience that is right for that user. And by having so many users, by analyzing their patterns and so on, you try to do that. So in the context of, for example, news, you want to do something like an explore-exploit approach. You want to understand what is going to be the best thing for the user, but not to be too focused, so you can also provide some novelty. And this is where the usage of big data is helping, in particular at Yahoo. For my part of work, I use big data differently. I work in what is called advertising science. So companies like Facebook, Yahoo, Google, and so on, they provide services for free, but they also need to pay the people providing the services. And this came from advertising. And I know people feel, oh, ads. Well, they are important, okay? And the part of my work is to analyze a lot of data about how users interact with the ad, to take the user perspective, so to understand why an ad is not a good one or is not the right one for the user, and so on. This is about what is called ad quality. So this is really trying to analyze this huge amount of data, understand why such type of ads are not all right, or are not the correct one, they have the wrong message, and so on to the user. And again, you can do that with big data. So it goes from a different thing is making the user experience better, helping them in their daily life. But there's also another thing that comes is serious algorithms. Huge processing of the data. So those are the two aspects that, for example, we work at Yahoo, and in particular the news and advertising.
Great, thank you. Well, already we've heard about themes that I think I'm picking up on across these different sectors and perspectives in terms of different issues and topics that data can help with, not just with research, but with government accountability and the ability for you and the County Council to move from a more reactive approach to a more proactive approach, which relates to personalization. And that was a theme, personalization, that certainly came from you, Mounia, as well. So that's great, thank you. So next, in terms of the context in which you've been working, what do you see are the key challenges faced in using big data for research in the UK, and why?
Do you want us to work down the line again? Or a different order?
Actually, why don't we go in a different order? We can start at the end. Thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, so in terms of the challenge, so again, it's going to be focused to my challenge. Because, well, that's why I'm here, to explain you my life as a, yeah. So first is access to data. Okay, so in our case, of course, Yahoo has a lot of data, but we also work with university and working on a really important, interesting problem, and is to provide data not just for us, but also universities. We have a lot of issues. Can I have some data? Can I have some data? It doesn't work like this. You cannot just give data to people, and so on. So it has to be done properly. You cannot just distribute data. And so on. So as part of Yahoo, there are a web scope program which prepares a large amount of data for people to actually carry research so that they can answer questions that interest them. So that's the first part. The other part is when you have this data, is the cleaning of the data. Let's say 60% to 80% of what we do in my team is to clean the data before you can even think of using it. There's a lot of noise. There's always something wrong, okay? One thing that we usually do, we just plot a distribution to try to see what's going on. And then you realize, oh, there was a failure that day. Let's just get rid of this because all your stats get completely wrong. So, and this is something that, with my experience, some people forget to do this. You come up with a result. Look, my predictive model is very, very good. And then you just, okay, let's just start from the beginning. And you realize, okay, let's go back. So it's the cleaning, the preparation of the data. So you're sure that what you have, what you get is correct. And then it's the interpretation. Again, from a science perspective. So you have this result. What does it mean? What is the impact? Is it going to improve the user experience? Is it going to bring more money? How much of it? What is also the cost of it? Is the cost, is it worth it? So, for example, in typical going back to advertising, I could show from a revenue perspective millions of ads on a page, but that's not going to work. User engagement is going to be impacted. I could show much less. So again, you try to identify what is a prediction of what is a good experience and how you can react to it, so then it becomes beneficial. You can make decision as a business, but also it can impact the algorithm. So the algorithm always tries to adapt to what is best for the user.
Stephen, your thoughts. You're involved in analysis as well. So what are the issues that you see?
Yeah, thank you. I think I should just very quickly first explain the reason why we're a kind of tag team today is that kind of Patrick has a more kind of strategic overview, and I'm the kind of data nerd that sits in the basement with no windows, doing the 80% of the cleansing of data that you mentioned there.
So he knows what he's talking about. That's
and I kind of really sympathise with the person that does that kind of cleansing of data, because I appreciate that is a lot of the work. But I think that is a real key issue, really, because I think the kind of phrase that I keep hearing is rubbish in, rubbish out. And if that kind of data isn't kind of cleanse, then obviously what you get out of the other side is going to not be as robust as you would like. We, on that kind of data issue itself, we have not an additional problem, but an additional layer in that we're trying to bring together different big data sets. Big data set 1, big data set 2, big data set 3, to create a super big data set, and in doing so, we have the kind of problem of matching data, and to match data, it has to be clean, has to be very, very clean. And I'd say for these type of kind of analytical projects, I mean, you mentioned 80% of the time cleansing, when you kind of throw that matching into the equation as well, I'd say the doing at the desk, 90% of that is that matching and cleansing, and 10% is the real interesting stuff. Unfortunately, you could spend 80-90% of your time bringing everything together, and at the end, there's not a huge amount that you can get at the end of the analysis. But it's, I think we've got a new approach at Essex where we want to kind of take those risks and be prepared to kind of spend time, and what we might get out of it at the end might not be as good as we would hope for, but only through kind of experimenting that way will we know. So that's the kind of the data, not necessarily an issue, but a challenge we have with our kind of big data sets. In addition to that, we want to do more of this kind of predictive analytics work with big data. We want to look at kind of demand management, forecasting, risk stratification, all these like really exciting analytical kind of tests. But within the kind of public sector, those kind of skills exist in silos, really. And if 2 or 3 of us tomorrow were, I think the example people usually use is hit by a bus, but I'm going to say if 2 or 3 of us won the lottery tomorrow and disappeared from work, yeah, we'd be even more reliant on kind of partners in kind of and academics. We're slowly kind of looking to get away from performance reporting and what happened yesterday, and look forward and do kind of more predictive stuff. We're getting there, and hopefully with kind of assistance from others, we'll soon be have some quite interesting kind of results. I am going to pass on to Patrick now, because he can give some more of the strategic challenges, and I'll leave the data alone for the time being.
Sorry. Thank you. So, I mean, there are loads of challenges around this stuff. So, I think a big one is around the ethics. I think Sharon's going to say more about that, but it is a relatively new area, at least in the public realm. And I think there are more. I mean, we're already probably familiar with some of the sensitivities and ethical issues around the private sector using data. I think those are magnified when it comes to the public sector using data. Because of the nature of the data and what it's being used for. So to give you an example, so we're really thinking about, we've done a lot of internal thinking about this in the context of the Catalyst program. So we're thinking about, so things like the purpose, what are we using the data for? Now you might say it's clear, if you're using it to sort of improve services or improve outcomes like school readiness for children, that's got to be ethical, and clearly that is ethical, but then you might say, well, actually, we're worried about what are you actually going to do with the data? Are you going to run some algorithm in your office and then say, oh, well, that means child X and child Y are at risk, and therefore, go knocking on people's doors and saying, sorry, we've run an algorithm that says, your child is at risk and we need to intervene. I mean, you can immediately see that would be massively problematic, and just in case there was any misperception, that is not what we're doing here. So it's about insight, not prediction. So I think there might be a difference. So when you're looking at clinical outcomes, like health outcomes, that's very scientific, you might be able to use data like that in a more straightforwardly predictive way. When it comes to looking at more of the social science angle and human behavior and the complex mix of why people end up with particular outcomes, I think you have to be more careful and use it as insight and not in a mechanistically predictive way. So just so we're not using this to go and say, oh, well, we've done a model and that means your child is at risk. We're not looking at individuals, we're looking at community level data and insight, but we're using it as insight, not as prediction, and as part of a broader mix of insight that tells us about where the challenges might be in communities, what might be some of the causal factors around that. So I think that's a really important ethical issue. There are clearly ethical issues around public consent to share data and how that data is managed. I think Sharon might say a bit more about that. And for us, there's challenge around, this is very much I think as we said before, a partnership program about sharing data across agencies. because that achieves the most impact, but that raises a whole load of questions then about cultural alignment, people's willingness to, organisations' willingness to share data, system alignment, all that sort of thing. So there are challenges, but actually we find that in dealing with those challenges, actually that can be tremendously, can open up great opportunities, because you start looking at things like culture change and how you collaborate more effectively, how you use insight in a really productive way to help communities. So the challenges can also be the seeds of really good opportunities as well. So it's actually a positive thing, I think.
Right. I'm going to try to be brief. I know we want to leave time for audience questions, but I'm going to mention a couple of things quite briefly and then pick up some of the ethical and rights-based issues. First, I will say one of the big challenges to not using the data we've got or help creating the demand is not enough social scientists with the skills that can do it. And it's great that we've got data analytics specialists, and ideally we want centers where they learn a bit more about social science questions, so they're not just operating on the basis of the common sense understandings we all have about why humans behave the way they behave, which social science often shows are either wrong or simplified. So we want data analytics professionals involved, but we need social scientists with a range of skills, number and data skills from advanced to fairly basic, but who can think of ideas, talk about the methods that would be used, have some sense of what the different methodologies mean. So all I'll say for younger members of the audience is it opens up really exciting questions. There was a really good panel that Sage ran last night as part of the Festival of Science, and Sage, the publisher, they'll be publishing it, trying to make the case that it opens up new and exciting social science issues. Second, a big challenge for administrative data of the sort I'm most concerned with is government willingness to grant access. I'm going to talk about the consent and ethics issues of that separately. Take that aside. Take aside the Big Brother worries. Of course, there are resource implications. We've heard about cleaning. We've heard about, these are administrative data. We know some of them in the DWP. I think it uses programs going back to the 70s because they've never managed to modernize it. I'm looking to Tanvi and Melanie here, but it's very, very old. And, they can't even fix the equipment. They have to have to fix the old equipment. So it's, they're challenges. I understand that. And that means resource challenges. But I am convinced that the biggest challenge with government allowing access is a culture. And it's not a culture of them worrying about consent and ethics, although they say it. And I know there's some of that. But we find that the devolved authorities in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland are managed to work around that. And remember, this is depersonalized data. They are not passing on to the researchers data with personal identification, and there's quite a process of matching to protect the different data sources and considering how much data is too much data given the identification. So it's not that. The real pressure is the Whitehall departments who don't want to hand data over. And I'm going to make a personal statement rather than one on behalf of the ADRN, but I think that is very much a concern about not really liking external scrutiny. What's interesting is we know they pass on data between themselves with their own process, and it's very rigorous, but it's not at all transparent. So it's not going to have any of the safeguards I'm going to talk about in a moment. So I worry that what we have is a culture that is just concerned that people might do the wrong things, but they don't necessarily mean let out identification. It just means ask a lot of questions, which might be misunderstandings, but might be quite right about what are the effects of these things. So I think we've got a job of work to do. There's a bill going through Parliament, but we do need a public debate that says this is for the public good. This is not commercial use. This is to understand our society, to make it better, and to inform people better. Now, finally, briefly on the ethics. We all are concerned about data linkage, data matching, and the Administrative Data Research Network, of course, fundamentally depends on that. But it's really important to say that we have thought a lot and researched a lot and learned a lot about things that would concern the public, as well as what we think is ethically right. And the thing I want to focus on is not just does the public trust us, but are we behaving in a trustworthy manner? So you really want to draw the distinction that you could have a model where the public trusted us. 60 million Americans trust Donald Trump to do what he says he's going to do. Does that mean it's trustworthy? That's what we're really concerned about. I thought giggling about it might be helpful. So, you know, we've got questions about, do we have safe data? Have we really thought about how much of the data we need to link at what level, and we're doing just what we need to answer the question? We've thought about, do we have safe settings? What's the data security? What a high standard? How sure can you be that no one can get into it? And that's not just for where the data is being analyzed once you've got it, it's during the matching phase and everything. We've thought about, quote, safe researchers who are trained but also face some pretty severe sanctions if they slip up and let something out, or if they try to match things they shouldn't. And we haven't had examples of that, but we've got processes in the state. We've got a thought about safe outputs. How do you publish the data so that you're not inadvertently revealing things that you shouldn't? But the biggest of these is something that might be called safe projects, but that I'm going to call, and I hesitate with eminent professors of law like Morris Sunken here, but going to call a social model of consent. We're not looking in these cases for individual consent to use depersonalized data. We can't practically, and more importantly, it would actually vitiate the reasons for using these data. Because if we sent a letter out and said, can we use your data, and we asked you to opt in, as we now have to do, we might get 3% of responses. So you could see that if you were looking at studying wealth accumulation and tax returns and so on, you know, it's again anonymized, but people might not want to do it. So we need to have that representative function. But what we do to make sure that we've thought about this is have an approvals process that isn't just us as social scientists saying this project is in the public benefit. We all know our views are colored by our interests, but there's lay involvement in those panels so that you've got someone from the outside saying, hang on a moment, I've gone through this proposal, I can see what data you're using and how you're going to match it. Show me how that's in the public benefit. And that was one of the ways that the care.data came a cropper, is not having that lay involvement for public benefit. So I think that's a really important safeguard, but it really does depend on taking that stage of the ethical approval far beyond the, do we as social scientists think it's ethical to do it? It's saying we have some notion that we've really thought through the benefits to the public of doing the research.
Great, thank you, Sharon. So there are a number of issues we talked about: data quality, data skills of staff or social scientists, data sharing, cultural change, and the idea of having a public debate about trust and trustworthiness. And the next question I'd like to ask all of you, I'd like to get you to go first, Patrick, is there a personal responsibility for each of us in this room and in society to support the use of big data collected by all of us for research if it helps change lives of others? What kind of public debate that you support you think we should be having in light of what Sharon was saying?
Thank you. So yes, I think there is. Change, I might change to improve, because I think, you know, you don't want to change lives in a negative way, but absolutely. So I think very much echo what Sharon said, which is that you know, that I think the public should support this. I think generally they do. So there's been work done, for example, in the Caldecott review. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but she's the national data guardian, and she's looked extensively at public attitudes to sharing data, and there is, relatively high support amongst the public for sharing their data for research purposes, but only where it's anonymized. So I think we've all been talking about the fact there's a difference between sharing anonymized data, which is also what we're only using anonymized data for our research purposes, not personal data, identifiable data. So they support it if it's anonymized, and also if there's a clear public benefit. So I think particularly around obviously around delivering better public services, improving sort of public outcomes. There may be a difference there in the commercial. So on the commercial side, if it's about sort of revenue raising and improving sort of commercial services, I think that might be different. But on the public side, there is quite strong support. But I think you can't take that as for granted. We have to sort of earn that trust and support, and obviously that means we have to use data in the right way, make sure it's got appropriate consent, and that it's held and used securely. As I mentioned in my previous intervention, you've got to use it in the right way, so you're not misusing it in how you're actually then acting on the basis of the insight you gain from it. And I think it's also really important to raise public awareness about the benefits, and maybe we don't do enough of that actually we're not getting across some of the great changes to public services that we're able to make as a result of data, and show the people the linkage between them sort of being willing to share data and actually the outcome at the end of it. Because ultimately that's what, if people see that and understand that, then they'll be, I think, more willing to share their data in the appropriate way.
Stephen?
Just to add to that, really, I mean, it's very easy for me when I'm kind of in my basement looking at my data sets to kind of bang my head against the wall and just kind of think, why can't everyone just give me all the data I need? If only I knew this, I could do that. If only I knew this, I could do all kinds of things. So I guess it is kind of raising that public awareness that we have the potential to kind of ensure the right people are getting the kind of right services at the right time, and also ensuring that the public have the kind of trust in us. We touched upon that earlier. I think we've quite a big challenge to get the kind of public to look at us favourably from every so often. But I feel that that kind of really only by demonstrating what we can do with the kind of information we've got and the intelligent people we've got to improve kind of the services we deliver, will we kind of start kind of getting people to have that additional confidence in us and want to provide us with that information, so we can continue to improve the lives of the residents of the county.
Okay, so looks like I'm the baddie now.
A different perspective.
Okay, so I think I want to, there is a responsibility, and big companies are taking this responsibility seriously. But I think it's important to differentiate between the type of data. So if you're using a site, you just come, click, spend time, and go. And those are often the kind of data that the like of Yahoo will be using. And this data is important to understand. Is the site okay? Am I giving you the right information, and so on? There's no medical data. There's hardly personalized data, maybe your name and a date of birth, which is anonymized. You have no idea who the person is. And often what tends to work is not only it's all anonymized, it is usually you're trying to understand a user pattern. So you often look at what is called a user segment. Okay, people from a certain state and this kind of thing, and trying to match the behavior to this. So medical data and so on that they get collected in a database and then you can share it. This is different, and so on. So again, is really about what is the purpose of the data. And there's another thing. We all have a mobile phone. Everybody know where you are. Okay. So it's not like, okay, so why the like of this, you have this data and this kind of thing, I don't want to use it. There is data everywhere. You're using Google Map, we know where you are, and these kind of things, okay? So there is, I think, from the corporate world, there is this responsibility to ensure that data remain confidential and is used for the good, in that case, to make the experience better, so people just can do what they need to do using those services.
You ask if there's a personal responsibility. I think I'd come back to two elements. First of all, thinking about what I was saying about social consent, and we've got both a legal framework and an independent information commissioner, but also some sense of making sure that people have, if they want to, can understand. I mean, we try to reach out at all kinds of events, but it becomes most relevant for people if you're asked to take part in a survey, or asked, if you're a member of a survey, then you're asked to link your data to administrative data, then you might want to know a bit about it. And I think all of that is very important. And again, I'd commend work that the ESRC commissioned Ipsos Mori to do, which explains the models of data matching and what the public feels about it. So I think that's there. But that's all saying there's a broad model of consent. Well, I was asked some years ago to be a member of Biobank, and many of you may know about this. It's funded by the Wellcome Commission, Wellcome Trust mainly, and they not only do a survey and they harvest all kinds of bodily samples and, you know, depressingly your weight and, you know, how much you've shrunk since you turned 50 and all of that. But also, you know, have ongoing permission to link to health records, my eventual death record, all of that. Now, they had a very clear model that that data could not be used to help your own health care even if they found something wrong. So if they'd done all of this and they'd found markers that I was very likely to have a heart attack when they did the blood sample, they would not write me a letter and tell me. And you stand back and you think about it. But then you think they really wanted a model that was motivated by saying, we've got to make sure people are doing this without coercion and as a matter of altruism. Now, that's an extreme model, but one of the reasons I think there is a social responsibility for people who are not just involved in the business of analyzing administrative data, but informed citizens, to think about what kind of society you want. Now, remember, again, these are depersonalized data. They're used for personal, public benefit. They've got external assessment of that. They're definitely not being used to drive changes in insurance premiums, which was carried up data's public problem. They're very clearly, you know, have thought through, but you think, what kind of society do we want? I mean, you have on one end of a spectrum places like Norway that actually post a summary of each individual's tax returns, so you can look up and see what your neighbor earns. I don't think we in the UK are at that point on the spectrum. Might be useful, certainly be interesting, but that's not where we are. But on the other hand, it does seem to me that if by understanding that the use of these data in these carefully constructed and constrained manners provides transparency. Every project that's agreed to gets posted on a website. You can see what work is being done. It's not the kind of Frankenstein experiments or Big Brother experiments. And it actually says these data can be used for public good. And it's not just your good. It's to say, well, what do we know about what might help life chances or health outcomes or whatever? And if it's only people who consent individually, we can't make those arguments. And I come back also finally to saying there is a model that I suppose I'm perhaps more radical than some, that says I would feel more comfortable if when government departments had to link their data, they had to go through the ADRN. Because then, and again, you can see reasons they do it. One of the classic cases which was publicized was following the 2011 riots in London. You got the DWP and the Ministry of Justice and I believe the Home Office to link data so they could, again, on a depersonalized data, this wasn't trying to find people, but to say, well, were the people that were involved in rioting, or at least that got a sentence for rioting, more likely to be from disadvantaged communities, or were they not? You know, what it was to try to give some social sense of what we could know about large-scale outbreaks. I have no problem that might be in the public good. I'm sure some people would, and that's the reason you have a committee, a group of people to discuss it. But what I feel uncomfortable about myself is the fact that government departments, however rigorous their process, they can link data, and they don't have to say what it's for. Even if it's depersonalized, this is not being worried about Big Brother. It's saying part of this is these are data that, although they're done to help make government deliver things, it's funded by us as citizens. And so my most radical proposal would say if government departments wanted to share data with each other, there would be more public safeguards if they went through the ADRN model. Now, I don't expect that to happen. Certainly not in the short term, but it does suggest to me that the more people can support the kinds of research that is definitely transparent and you can look at and you can engage with as a citizen and you have a sense it's for public good, then that's something that isn't just about accepting it quiescently. It is something we should be supporting.
Great. Well, those are great issues to discuss. So we can discuss them at length, but we also want to give time for you all to ask questions. So I'm going to ask one final question for all the panelists to chime in on. I'd love to have Mounia, you go first, Sharon, and then we'll hear from the County Council last. Is what types, you've talked about issues that we've been dealing with and studying historically, what are types of challenges that research using big data can help solve now or in the future? Back to Stephen's comment about being there in his basement and thinking, if I only had access to this, that would help that. So what are kinds of issues and challenges that this could help if we were able to have broader access? So Mounia, will you go first?
So I want to point to differences. There's the access to the data and making sense of it so you can solve a problem, a business problem, whether it's revenue, user experience, and so on. And there is the algorithmic part of it. So for example, as part of Yahoo, we do publish the work we're doing on big data. So not only this inform other people about, for example, what kind of male behavior we're having and all those kind of things, but also from the algorithmic perspective. Because I'm coming more from a computer science background, so you can have big data, you can clean it, you can do the predictive analytics, but there's a lot of technical issue that also need to be solved and so on. And by focusing also on advancing state-of-the-art or making things faster, then we can make progress to analyze the data better. There are also in the research community people that are dedicating themselves to anonymize data, to make sure that the data can be distributed to more people, but in a totally anonymized way. So as part of Yahoo, we do distribute data through a web scope and so on, but you never know. You have to make special contract with people, but there is a whole research from the algorithmic perspective to make better usage of the data. And a company like Yahoo, it's what it's trying also to do, in addition to try to also exploit the research, so to make the user experience better. So I wanted to add more this algorithmic part, which I think is very important.
Thank you. Sharon?
Yes, I'm not really good. I think I've given quite a lot of examples and talked about using admin data. The one thing I probably haven't mentioned enough is the kind of gains you can get by linking the survey-based data, which is much deeper data. I mean, most administrative data is very big and very thin, And if you can link it with studies like the Understanding Society study that's led here at Essex, then you can actually ask really important questions. And some of those go into research publications, but a lot of them have influenced everything from design of Sure Start, design of all kinds of preschool interventions, understanding the way schools can help. So there's a lot that can be done with that. And I can't help resist adding that even in the cases where the people who take part in these studies have given consent to link the data to their administrative records, it can take 2 or 3 years for government to hand on, to feel they can hand on those data. So, as I said, it's not just the lack of consent.
Thank you. And from your perspective, what issues would you like to address better?
World peace. Thankfully, that's not our responsibility. So I think, who knows? But I would say sort of tackling inequality generally is a really key thing. I mean, we know that outcomes in society are economic, health outcomes are massively unequal. Lots of people are thriving and living longer and prospering, and yet there is a part of society where actually that isn't happening. And actually that's really important. I think everyone is realizing that that's really important to tackle those inequalities. And I think big data has got a really important role to play in giving us greater insight into the causes and pathways into poor outcomes. I mean, we sort of know generally that there's obviously a strong link between deprivation and a lot of other negative outcomes, but big data can give us potentially better insight, more granular insight into exactly what some of these drivers are and where the points are at which you can help people change their lives in a positive direction, obviously with their support. And what are the sort of types of intervention and support that are most likely to be effective? As Stephen was saying, right time, right place, etc. So I think that could be massively powerful. I think we'd all probably like to live in a society where these inequalities were not so stark, and hopefully big data can play a role in helping to achieve that.
Just adding that to that as well. I think a kind of key word you said there was pathways, and we're not necessarily interested in individuals, but the kind of pathways and critical points within them. So in the past, at kind of Essex, we have a really good knowledge of, say, our social care pathway, from point of entry through to the kind of escalating needs over time, right through to kind of end of life care. And in kind of health circles, they have a really good kind of profile of what happens in kind of the health realm. But by bringing those together and bringing that data together and those pathways together will give a much kind of richer, holistic view and kind of present more opportunities to kind of prevent or reduce undesirable service use or kind of delay that kind of escalation up a care pathway while still maintaining people's independence and quality of life. I mean, it's quite sad that myself, if there was a world where there's kind of lots of rich data, I would probably never leave work. Because I think I'm a big advocate of kind of exploring this kind of quantitative data. And I could probably come up with multiple examples. In my kind of previous roles, I've had a broader view of kind of all Essex County Council services, and in the past we've looked at big data to try and kind of target interventions towards people at risk of being socially isolated. Other examples, we've looked at kind of targeted communications campaigns at areas where there's perhaps an inequality between fear of crime and actual crime which is happening, to try and make people feel safer in their own communities. We've looked at seeing if we can use kind of big data sets from our kind of education world to predict risk of someone being NEET, so not in education, employment and training, in order to ensure that there's kind of suitable interventions for that particular risk pathway. I won't bore you and go on with my many other examples, but I'm a big advocate of kind of big data and the use of it. Obviously, a lot of work goes into the point of having this kind of rich data set, and a lot of work happens at the end of it. It's no use me being able to kind of produce this kind of neat risk model, which is 100% accurate at identifying risk, unless someone from Patrick's side then can do something kind of operationally with it. But I think there's, well, I won't go give any more examples, but please feel free to catch up with me later. And I'll bore you all to tears with my 100 ways we can use big data to improve the world.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think this is a self-selected group, so I bet these are the precise people that you would not bore to tears with your comments.
Oh, I can try.
So I'm going to briefly sum up and then hand it over to you all, that we've heard about a number of benefits of the use of data, more effective and more personalized services, the ability to use survey, administrative, and commercial data to look at issues and linking data across and within those different data types, addressing issues such as health and inequality and risk, the effectiveness of public services, and as Stephen was just saying, and exploring the unknown issues that we might not even realize we want to address until we are able to look at that data in a new way. But that to work on this, we face a number of issues: technological effectiveness, as Mounia was saying, issues of ethics and public consent, and how you and members of the public think about the use of your data and the sharing of your data, and how we can share data across organizations but make sure that data is high quality and well documented and well cleaned, as you were saying, and how cultural change relates to this, and how we can think about having an organization whereby we can have data sharing in the most effective, appropriate way with the trustworthiness that Sharon was talking about, so that organizations such as the archive where I work have practices as data stewards in the safe mechanisms that she was talking about. How can we help to connect that trustworthiness with the public discussions and concerns that people have? So those are some issues that we've heard, but we certainly would like to hear the issues that you're facing you'd like to pose to the panelists. So we're going to have about 20 minutes for questions. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you have a question, and there's a mic that will go around. Please briefly introduce yourself and say your name. Remember that this is all being recorded, and try to make your question brief so we can have ample time for many people to ask questions. So Melanie first.
Hi, I'm Melanie Wright. I'm I actually work with the Administrative Data Research Network here. A portion of it is here at Essex. But my question is actually not about administrative data at all. It's a question for Professor Lalmas. You were very keen to sort of separate out the kinds of data that you're dealing with as opposed to the kinds of data that perhaps were being used further down the line, and sort of implying that there are fewer ethical dimensions to it because of the kind of data it is. You're focusing on things like improving the user experience. And I'm going to put it to you that, in fact, there are actually significant and potentially severe impacts to using data in that way. And the example I'm going to give you is the recent election in the States, which is, you can tell from my accent, is close to my heart. There is an analysis of what happened in the election that talks about Trump supporters being radicalized online, specifically through the unintended consequences of this improved user experience. You have a person who is, through the observation of what kind of things they click on, what links they follow, what happens then, that they are then fed more and more of that kind of information. So they're not interested in the BBC, they're interested in Breitbart.org. They're not interested in articles that do, careful analysis of sexism and racism in America. They're interested in articles about how white men are getting the shaft in America. And then alongside that, they're also being shown ads for guns because that's what they're interested in. Now you can see where I'm leading with this. Don't organizations like yours have a social responsibility to think about that. When you're trying to improve the user experience, you're actually just creating factions which are potentially hugely problematic for the whole world.
Ooh. You can take a minute to think about that if you need.
I'm also struggling since yesterday, so it's so it's called the filter bubble. And I do research in this area, in separation, for example, using Twitter. And I was supervising a student when I was based in Barcelona to try to put people with opposite view to talk to each other. This is very difficult. It's nearly impossible. So the way we did it, we tried to find something they have in common, so then we can recommend a person to follow. Okay? They like wine, or they like a particular film, and there's a technique to try to identify which kind of person it is, depending on what they tweet about. Okay? So there is an effort into this. What is more difficult is the people. People do not want to hear about somebody with a different view. And whatever a company like Yahoo, Google is doing, is going to be difficult for us to help. There is a lot of work trying to understand, that has been published by people from Microsoft, Bing, to understand bias in search results. So people are working on this, because there's enough data now to see that there is a bias. And this is published, is presented at conferences, and so on. In terms of the ads and the gun, I didn't know that there was gun ads. I don't think it's legal.
A very brief response, then I want to give the next.
Yeah, I don't think it's legal. I think there are policy in each country about what kind of ads are shown. So this I don't know about this.
Okay.
So.
Yes, you were in the check shirt here. You were next.
I can just
project. All right, great. And then
standing.
keep your hand up so that she can go next with her mic.
okay. So I guess one response I had to most of the discussion here, which in my take of it might be a little bit more optimistic than I'm used to about big data. Police organizations, for example, think that they are using big data in a way that benefits society. And when you ask them that, that's what they think. For example, they think of it as producing a very objective way of producing patrol strategies. But what you find is that they just continue to target the males, kind of same old thing. Why does that happen? Is it just human error? Or is there something about big data which is we're not understanding, which is causing these problems to continue despite
Yeah.
So I can't comment on the police, but I think I sort of touched on it a bit, this issue, in one of my earlier remarks about how you use it, and that there's a danger that you sort of do risk profiling, and you sort of make assumptions then about people in an unhelpful way. So as I said, that's not what we're doing, and I'm sure if the police were here, they would sort of say the same thing, that it is about gaining insight as part of a mix of sources of insight. So it's not taking a mechanistic view and saying, well, we've run this model that says actually all people with this and this characteristic are going to be criminals or mistreat their children. So you have to use it in a very careful way and as part of a broad mix of insight. I think actually big data can be helpful because arguably it also challenges prejudices, doesn't it? Because actually you're leaving outside whatever, if it's normal, if you're making a normal human judgment, if you're making your interventions based on human experience and judgment, arguably that leaves more scope for prejudice and a person's values in how you act. If you're looking at data, actually it's more objective. So I think it can help challenge prejudices and sort of values as well. So I think it can be a positive factor, but it is about using it in an intelligent way.
Can I say, I understand your concern, and as you say, in a way, the argument is you've got the same social biases and prejudices as you might have with stop and search that can then get applied using big data and so on. And some of those risks and bad outcomes are the same, whether it's stop and search or big data, and some are different and greater possibly in some ways with big data. I do want to come back to say, first of all, one way, and I'm not naive, I don't think it's the only way to handle it, but one way to open this up, and an advantage big data can have if we insist on certain standards for its use, is to be transparent. So to make the police publish certain things, publish certain outputs. Certainly when the first versions of the crime maps were done in London, which brought together administrative data based on people's reporting, made you think about the process by which those were generated and who felt enough trust to report things to the police and so on. And that gave rise to a really helpful debate. So there need to be safeguards, and again, it come back to who gets to decide what's in the public benefit, and that is partly always a small p political issue. But what we can insist on is that we have that conversation, and we have it about the outputs, and we use that to interrogate the purposes for which things are done. And that requires all of us, not only in research, but public authorities to do as Essex has done, which is to be transparent about what you're doing. I think Tammy wants to. Is this related?
Yeah, if it's related,
Sorry,
then we'll do
sorry.
it, and then we'll Aiden next, because you were rating too.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on this discussion, because I think this is a very important issue.
Oh, remind us of your name and where
Sorry,
you work.
I'm Tanvi Desai. I'm with the Administrative Data Research Network as well. I think what we need to remember, which actually comes very strongly through to Sharon's point about the importance of social sciences, data aren't neutral. They're not, there's this tendency to believe that data is this kind of perfect neutral thing, but the data that are collected are, particularly with administrative data, potentially have the biases of people collecting. I mean, what you're saying with the police. You say to someone, they'll say, well, it's proven we have statistics that show there's more crimes committed by black people. How were those statistics collected? So you've got those questions. So I think where you have a danger is if you take it from a purely data analytics point of view, you look at the data as something clean and pure, you knock out your results and you think that's real. Without that kind of social science aspect where you can think, where is the bias? How do we look at these things? Then really a lot of what you're doing is not going to be as useful as you would like it to be.
Hello, I'm Aidan Conlon with the Big Data Big Data Network here in Essex. This is an easier one. Both Stephen and the professor, you both talked about data cleaning, and you often hear these figures of 80-90%. It's difficult, it's time consuming, and it's labour intensive. But I assume that you're working on refinements and technologies to improve these things all the time. So why doesn't that change? What kind of techniques are you using? Are you employing machine learning? And why isn't there more improvement there? Is it because new sources of data are coming all the time? Is it because of the diversity in projects? Or, what's going on?
Well, you kind of answered. So you have a new problem, there's new data, you may need to kind of integrate from other things, so you're starting kind of from scratch. Then when this is done, then you can do a lot of analysis and a lot of work. So, for example, I was working in the area of news engagement, and then I worked in the area of advertising. So what happened is when you work in a particular area, the data is organized in a particular way. And then you move to another area within the same company. The data is different. You have a new site that gets launched. And then, for example, you go from, let's move all into mobile site. So suddenly, all the work you did analyzing user on the desktop to understand, their behavior, to improve their experience. Now you have all this what's coming from the mobile. And then you have Android instrumentation, and you have like iOS instrumentation. So it's always when there's something new coming, and then you have to spend quite some time. But then now we have a lot of data. There's data engineer that actually doing this work, and then it goes fine. Then you can do. So when we say 80% and then 20%, the 20% is many of the 20%. There's a big 80% and then a 20 for different usage.
I think for ourselves, as more kind of data becomes available, as we start to work more collaboratively with other partners outside of the county council, that brings its own kind of cleansing issues in that I could stand and say, well, my county council data sets are 100% clean, I've thought them all out, they're fine from now forward. But then when I try and match that with kind of partner data, it may well be that they cleanse the data as well, but the addresses are slightly different. And I tried to do a kind of exercise recently where I wanted to kind of map together data sets based on address, and just think of the different ways things could be recorded. So say 10 King Road, it could be recorded somewhere else with 10, King Road. 10 King Road could be a building with 20 flats in it. And it's just, I started trying to do this manually. Within about 3 hours, I'd got about 5% of the data and I gave up. There's ways around it. There's lots of kind of fuzzy matching approaches where to try and bring stuff together. But unless we kind of all have the same cleansing framework, we're going to have problems when we come to matching that stuff. And that's becoming quite apparent over the last few months.
So do we have time for a question over here and then maybe one last question after that? Oh, great.
Libby Bishop at the UK Data Service. I think my question will come back to trustworthiness. So several of you have made important distinctions about drawing boundaries between what makes a data use appropriate or not so. And so it's okay for insight, it's not okay for predictives. It's permissible in instances for the administrative data for research for public good purposes, but not for commercial purposes. So these boundaries are important to try to maintain, but they're also not impermeable. And the care.data case is one in point. Whether or not it was sold to the insurance companies, we may know, may not know, but the point was it was hard to prove either way, and it raised public suspicions. So my question is, when we're promised certain things about how data are going to be used, how can we come to trust those promises? And I think we're in an era where there are growing risks of something I'll call condition creep or criteria creep. There will be pressures to prove the impact of the investment in big data research, to prove that it's working, whether it's in criminology or other areas. And as the budget cuts hit, as I believe they will, there are going to be pressures to show better use of resources and show effects there. So how can the commitments to trustworthiness be documented, authenticated, so that we can actually believe that the data will, in fact, be used in the ways that we originally were assured that they would be? Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you going to ask the questions two together?
No, I was just saying, no. Go ahead and answer. I was
Right,
trying to pass the mic while you were answering the question.
All right, okay. I think, Libby, that's a really important comment. And it's particularly important because on the one hand, we have boundaries, but it's not just they're permeable because of slippage. It's because as times change, things may need to change. And how do we engage in that? So, you said insight versus predictive. I'm interested in predictive things, but at an anonymous, at a D, not predicting a particular individual. So not whatever that Tom Cruise film was that said, you're going to predict who's going to commit a murder and mayhem breaks out. And since I only watched the trailer, that's all I know. So there's a question about trying to say, what are we using it for? It seems to me there's certain things that we have to be absolutely clear about. And again, I keep coming back to this depersonalized versus personalized and so on. And those have got to be not just said and reiterated, but publicly clear as part of the guarantees, as it were. So that's up on the ADRN website. It's up on the UK Stats Authority website. We talk about it in all the written things. It's clear in all the consent forms that people from the studies ask, and that's a kind of harder line. The issue on the commercial line, yes, and we've had the putative example of the Swiss Re insurance case. And again, some people, it comes back to who judges public benefit. Some people, I can think of some economists, could make an argument that having a really efficient insurance market is a good thing. It's not probably quite what most of us thought we were doing with public benefit. On the other hand, and I really commend, again, the work the Wellcome Trust did, carried out again by Ipsos Mori, to look at, yes, there is more skepticism about commercial use, partly because it's not clear that some of these wider social effects are thought about, but partly because, of course, commercial companies need to sell things. So what makes something better for a person versus the company versus the society, that's tricky, and different people will have very different views about it. But there are some things where you might want commercial access under very stringent safeguards, where you could say this really is for public benefit, and the classic case is to do with health-related research. All I can say there is it seems to me, again, the ADRN for now has given a very clear undertaking. We're looking at keeping track of this wider debate, but I don't think we're going to immediately be changing it. But what we do want to think about is it's not just a function of the user. It's what's it for and who decides. And if one were to make a change, we would have to do outreach and change, be very clear and transparent, but then be very clear about what we meant by that. So there is a lot of pressure, as you say, to get commercial users in. They'll be able to show impact and so on. And I get that, and I have to say, I personally, I think I know my politics. I'm not unilaterally against all commercial users. For me, it's who benefits, what's it for, how big is the benefit, and how can we make sure we have a reliable way of judging that, and safeguards to stop it being misused, and clear discussions with the public and decision makers about what that means. So I don't think we're there yet, but as I said, it seems to me that's an example of a boundary that I actually would expect to change, but only explicitly, transparently, with public discussion and justification, and with safeguards, because once you start switching a boundary to someone having a more direct benefit than getting a publication as the personal benefit of doing the research or improving personal services, public services, that's clear. But once you're starting to think about things that could allow people to make a lot of money, you've got to think about it.
Thank you. All right, Freddie, we only have time for one last question, so please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Vivian. I work with the Human Rights Big Data and Technology Project. So coming from a human rights background, my question is more targeted at the potential concerns with the individual. Several of the panelists have, talked about the public benefit, and I agree that there are, some great public benefits, but then this doesn't mean that there are no risk to the individual. And, be it from whether the insights are about a group and at a policy strategic level kind of decision, there are targeted interventions or product innovations that affect the individual. And so what I'm curious to hear is what sort of, or how far has the individual potential harm been considered in your organizations, and what sort of safeguards have there been beyond anonymization and de-identifying data? Because with the super big data that you've talked about, I'm skeptical about how far our information can really be de-identified once you combine the information, even if you remove the name or apparently identifying attributes. And it concerns me because there are great data protection issues. There are these problems that could have very adverse, significant consequences for the individual. And I just want to hear, what is that kind of balance that you strike between the cost and benefits, and whose cost is it? Are we talking about, aside from the benefits to the public? Thank you.
Would one of you like to take that?
So now I point towards you.
Oh, sorry. I thought so yeah, I mean, this is it's a really important issue. I would say, as a public, I'm not claiming that public organisations are necessarily more ethical or moral than commercial organisations, but I think we do. I mean, ingrained in our culture, I think we are very conscious of these issues, and we've obviously got elected politicians who are accountable to the public as well, and a lot of press scrutiny. And I just think, ultimately, I think a culture in an organisation is arguably the best, and transparency as well, rather than just relying. Regulations are important, but how culturally, what is your organisation's approach to these things is really important. And I have to say, from my experience, I think the culture is really careful about these things. So we can't, we have we've got our data guardian, who has to sign anything off before we can share data in this way. And we've talked to her through this, and she's absolutely raising all of these points, these human rights, these concerns about, not just obviously the data being held securely and all the rest of it, people not being identified, but how are we going to use the data? So all these issues about not using it in a mechanistic way, not using it to target particular groups, all this sort of thing. This absolutely comes up in the discussion. and it's really, she will not sign that off until she's satisfied about that. And then when it comes to obviously you've then got a second round, because when you actually come to design your policy or make your interventions and all the rest of it based on the insight, that then again is subject to another process, and you have to go through all of these sorts of processes where you look at the impact on individuals and human rights and equalities before you can make anything. Elected cabinet members have to then sign it all off, and you have to make absolutely sure as part of your process, regardless of actually what data you're using to inform that you are acting in a way that is consistent with human rights, consistent with equalities, non-discriminatory. So it's really built into the system, both at the sharing information stage and at the stage in which you then you design your policy or your intervention, in my experience.
Can I just add for the ADRN, first of all, looking at what is the risk to individuals but also to groups is part of the approvals procedure, part of the ethics procedure. So you actually do think about that. Secondly, I understand why you're worried about depersonalized data. First of all, remember, it's more than just stripping off your name. It usually means thinking very carefully about, do you need this fine-level geographic data if you're also getting very detailed income data or, those sorts of things. So again, it's only the data you need, and thinking about that. And the reason I stress that is, again, because I think that's very different from the kind of data mining you get every time you agree to a cookie, where everything you've got there. I mean, one of the case studies given in the SAGE panel last night is somebody who was pregnant, newly pregnant, was on Facebook, and her sister got a Facebook message saying, "Are you going to be the most fun aunt ever?" And she hadn't told her sister she was pregnant yet. So you can kind of see that. I'm not sure that's a human rights violation, but it's kind of socially awkward. But I think it's really important to remember that this is not just let's mine everything and then we'll use it, but we'll keep it safe and anonymous. It's a much more carefully constructed data set. Thirdly, of course, it still does have risks, and that's why we've got these additional safeguards about outputs, which are legally enforceable. But finally, as I said, it does seem to me that you've got to think about remembering there is also a set of social human rights. And it's been very interesting. Dame Caldecott has a very good discussion of this in one of her reports. Honora O'Neill has a very good discussion in some of the work that she's done. And it is important to remember that if we were to reduce all of this to individual consent, what it actually means is we'd all sign up for things, on web. You'd leave a set of social powers actually in hands that weren't transparent and that weren't doing public benefit research. And so it's really important to think carefully about how you protect rights without elevating individual consent to the only way of protecting the rights of individuals and society.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to you all for bringing your issues, and thank you to the panelists for bringing your different perspectives. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Sasha to conclude.
Thank you very much for really fascinating discussion just there. Can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah, okay. So before we finish, I just want to return to those questions that we asked you at the beginning. Can you pick up your clickers again? Clickers ready? Okay, so having heard that really illuminating discussion, can you now tell us how much you understand about big data? Do you understand a lot about big data, a little, or nothing at all? A lot, B, a little, C, nothing at all.
I hope nobody's gone backwards.
They haven't been paying attention, if they have. Or they're just trying to disturb the data. So from what you've heard tonight, do you feel that research using big data has a role in our society to make a positive difference? A, yes, I agree it will make a positive difference. B, no, I do not agree it will make a positive difference. C, I'm unsure. A, yes, it'll make a positive difference. B, no, I don't agree it will. C, I feel unsure.
Matthew's become undecided.
Okay. So thank you all for being experimental subjects. We'll get the results in just a minute. We're using a bit of a mixture of new and old technology here. Meanwhile, I would just like to say thank you to all the panellists, to Sharon, to Mounia, to Stephen and Patrick for sharing their thoughts and experiences with us today, and to Katherine for chairing the panel. Do we have the results? Just about. Just coming. Yeah, while the results are just finalising, I would like to invite you all, not quite yet because you need to hear the results, but to join us for a drink in the entrance lobby afterwards, and also to remind you that we've got another talk next week along the theme of human rights, Big Data, Big Brother. So that's Thursday the 17th. In a week's time, we'll be picking up some more of these issues and exploring them in more detail. So at the start of the session, we asked you how much you understand about big data. 37% of you said a lot, 47% a little, 16% said nothing at all. I'm pleased to say that 62% of you now understand a little, compared with 47%. So we've got an increase in the understanding a little. Interestingly, some of you have realised that you don't understand or know as much as you thought you did, which is an excellent result. 37% of you originally said that you understood a lot, and 33% of you now think you understand a lot, which I think is actually what learning is all about. It's realising the limits of what you know and what you don't know. So I don't see that as a defeat. I see that as a part of the learning experience. And in terms of whether big data will make a positive difference, at the beginning, which am I reading out here? I'll just finish with one more. See, after hearing the panel, 69% of you think big data can make a positive difference to society. 5% said you don't think it can. 26% of you are still unsure, which means that at least those 26% should come back next week and hear some more. But I'd invite you all to do that. And please do hand in your clickers, fill out your forms, and join us for a drink afterwards. Thank you, everyone.